214 Blanchard caught fire, and the whole right side was engulfed in flames. Lily May had been out with us, and when she got back, Misa had said casually, "The house is on fire." They started taking out their most important possessions and putting them in the yard. I didn't understand why they didn't try to put the fire out, just kept living there as it burned. But it never went beyond that right side of the house, and the next day they decided they may as well start taking some possessions of secondary or even tertiary importance outside to the yard. We were taking clocks, little things, anything we might want, but it felt like, for the most part, they didn't even want to save their things, and they wanted the fire to burn their house down. They had guests come over, were just hanging out while they still had the house. "Why don't you guys try to put out the fire?" I asked. They said something like it's too big to try. I guess they figured they'd have to do it with a fire extinguisher or something. I was staying at the house and was on the staff of a conference for addiction recovery in underprivileged LGBT youth. I needed to make some posters communicating an email address and a website for support, and I made them kind of creatively with the words winding around shapes and stuff. The two I made were kind of too busy, and I thought I should make a third one that was just the info and hearts. I showed them to Mom, and she said something like, "Those are completely terrible." I said, "I wouldn't say they're completely terrible, just no," she interrupted. "They're completely terrible." She wouldn't even discuss it. I decided I'd still use the busy ones, plus make one more simple one. As we stayed at the house and the fire remained contained to that one part of the house, I started to worry more and looked into the burning area and saw Finnegan walking around in there. I decided I would secretly call the fire department while no one was looking. I started planning out what I would say on the phone. "Will you put out a fire at 214 Blanchard in Donaldson?" I went outside with my phone because people were hanging out inside. But then Frank came out, then Misa, and I had to be honest. "Can I please just call the fire department? They can put it out so easily, and you can keep all your stuff and have a place to live, and the landlord won't lose their house." They thought I made a good point. I wondered why no neighbors had called until this point. I couldn't find the number because Google search wasn't working on my phone and it was really hard to type. I asked to use Frank's phone. It was still hard to use because the internet router was in the burning part of the house. I finally reached them and they came, but they didn't want to go in and put out the fire because they always have to throw their rapiers in first, and they didn't want to waste them on our fire. Loads of water had started rushing in from somewhere on its own, higher up, putting out the fire a little. Should I just call 911? Would that help? Misa was on the phone with some fire department, dilly-dallying and not really getting to the point. So I know this is not one of my more wild and colorful dreams. I definitely usually have crazier adventures and characters and random occurrences and different locations and just plots. But it stuck in my emotional field for a long time in the way that certain dreams do. And it seemed really pertinent to a lot of the emotional and stressful things that had been going on in the past several months of my life, and really metaphorical for that. The very beginning part where Lily May comes home and Misa is just really casual about saying that the house is on fire, I think was inspired by an actual moment I lived through when I was living with Lily and Misa at 214 Blanchard this summer, where I wasn't realizing the strain and distance and coldness in their relationship. I thought they were doing okay until I got home with Lily May from a weekend trip, and they hadn't seen each other in a while, and they just saw each other and were really cold towards each other, especially him, and she kind of tried to hug him, like, hi. And he kind of didn't really let her, and I just saw that and it really stuck in my mind of a point of realization. And so just at this point when it's representing the relationship, the fire burning is there's something really wrong in their relationship and they're not doing anything about it and they're being really casual. And towards the end of the summer, Lily May ended up moving out and she had to get all these possessions out of the house and it was stressing her out and she didn't have time. And so I think that's part of the taking the possessions out, putting them in the yard. She even got rid of a lot of stuff and just had these big piles of garbage by the garbage cans that was too much for the garbage to take. And I also was in this transitional living situation where I was crashing at their house, which was kind of a strange middle of things to be in while this was going on in their lives. But I also was discovering and having to get rid of a lot of my things that had gotten moldy out at our country house that I thought we would be living in but haven't been. And so that's also just taking your stuff somewhere but you're not actually putting it anywhere better. You're putting it in the yard, which, okay, now it's not going to get caught fire if the house burns down, but it's going to get rained on. It's out in public now. It could get stolen, could get dirty, worms through it, all kinds of things. And also for Lily May and for me, as their relationship was ending, this house was becoming no longer an option. So it wasn't literally on fire, but we did have to move out, and it felt kind of like a panic because no one knew where they were gonna live for a little while, and they're in the middle of so many things. And they really did have guests come over and different things, events happen there. They still recorded together, still had some functional levels of their relationship happening. A big thing that stands out for me is the part of the house that was on fire and it never extended beyond is where their bedroom was and their dogs and their stuff. And Frank and I were living in the other side of the house, the more public side of the house, that, yes, had a lot going on, a lot of kind of chaos and commotion going through it, but not the same kind of turbulence of a relationship ending and going really bad that was hidden from us for months on this other side. So it was all this fire of their relationship burning down was kept to that secret side of the house, and it had that energy to it. So taking out the secondary and tertiary stuff, I think is partly me. Now that I have my own apartment, I actually can have some of my possessions out, because before that I could only have my primary possessions as I was in this limbo and living in a tiny room in someone else's house. But now that I had my own house, you know, I could get the tertiary things. It reminds me of those estate sales that I went to at the beginning of moving into this apartment, and just going through someone else's house and being like, well, these aren't super important things, but if they have to throw everything out in this house, you know, let's take some clocks, let's take some spatulas, you know. And when I first was realizing the turmoil that their relationship was in, it was kind of confusing to me why they wouldn't be working on it, you know, trying to talk through things or going to counseling or something, because they were engaged to be married, they'd been together for years, they created amazing art together, they did all kinds of cool things together. It seemed like the relationship was really awesome. And so I was kind of curious about that, and it even was affecting my life. Well, like, if you guys break up, then can I still keep working on the things I'm working on with you, like in your studio and everyone being a team and living in your house? Probably not, but to them it was too big to try, so that's what they were talking about. And at this point, I see the fire and the burning down house also representing a big stressor, excitement, change thing for my life, which is working on my album. It was hard for me to set up and do a lot of the things that were in my control, just set dates to get people over and record different tracks and me to record different tracks. But by the time I had this dream, I'd done most of that, and everything was in other people's hands. It was in Misa's hands, and it's in the hands of John, who's the other person I recorded the other half of the record with. And so it kind of feels like your house is on fire, it's out of your control, you kind of have to reach out to bigger resources to help you. You can't just use a fire extinguisher. It's not at fire extinguisher level anymore. You've already done all that. There's the whole section of me working for the LGBT Youth Addiction Conference and my mom criticizing my posters. And I think that partly is representing all the other work I'm trying to put out and work on and put energy into, and not really doing that great of a job at, because my focus and my desire is mainly towards getting this album out. This is going to be a big step for me. It's going to be higher quality than any of the other recordings I'd put out. It's really important for my career right now. Any of my other recordings that I send to venues, festivals, etc. are just lower quality, and they're making an impression of that being what I can do, and so I really need this higher quality album to be done. And people were agreeing with me, like Frank saying, like, you really need these new recordings, you can't keep sending these old ones because they're not representing your best work. And so kind of that criticism of my art, whether it's true or not, I think in my dream reflected as my first critics in my life, which were my parents, my brother, everything. So that's my mom, who always criticized my visual art when I was a kid, because she was a visual artist and an art teacher and everything. I couldn't really just show my mom a picture of like a tree and a rainbow and have her enjoy it and put it on the fridge. She'd tell me everything that was wrong with the composition and everything. And so that's why it got deep into my psyche, because it was a dream. But it's also funny because my mom definitely has like a house burning down, too much stuff scenario right now too. And so that's the way people in your dream are reflecting yourself. It became really important to do something about this fire when I looked into that part of the house again and saw Finnegan walking around in there. And Finnegan is this big old dog that I lived with at my last house before living with Lily and Misa, when I thought I was moving to the country right away. And Finnegan's an okay dog, but he also was really naughty, and he'd poop everywhere and pee everywhere and tear things up. The house was always just in shambles when it used to be a really peaceful place before he lived there. So I had a complicated relationship with him. But it's interesting, in the dream when I saw him, the emotion that I felt was just, I have to protect this dog. It's all well and good that we're trying to live in this house and just save some of our possessions, and we'll get out when we need to, but these dogs, we can't have a dog in danger in this house. He's too close to the fire. And I think it was Finnegan as the dog and not Georgia, who's the main dog of my life, because Georgia, I can really handle Georgia. She's like one of my best friends, and we have a relationship, and I'm able to take care of her. But one of the crazy things while Misa and Lily were going through the end of the relationship and their fights and who's gonna move out and all this stuff, they adopted 2 puppies and took in a foster puppy, and it was like, there's all this chaos of this house and we don't know if we can even be here, and there's all these stresses and we can't even be home because you're touring and he's working on projects and all this stuff. How are you bringing in puppies right now, like little crazy puppies that bark all day and pee and like cause all this stress, and there's just no peace in the house? And so I think that was why they were represented by Finnegan. So I think when I secretly call the fire department, I think one of the things I'm doing that's secret, a little bit, not really, but a little bit secret, of my album is planning to hire a publicist who's pretty expensive once the album project is done, and that represents the reaching out to the bigger power, the bigger resource that can help me take what I'm trying to do further. You know, I'm done with the fire extinguisher part. I need a fire truck and huge hoses and firemen. In this artist world that I live in, it seems like you kind of have to posture that you're really poor and have no resources a lot of the time, otherwise people won't ever help you or they'll like take advantage of you. And I have been paying people, but not as much as like a record label would be, for example, and no one really expects that, but if they see that I'm spending all this money on a publicist, what will they think? I think they'd understand in the end, but all these money things come up, and not just with the album, but with my relationship with these people, and you know, we were paying rent sometimes and sometimes we weren't, and all kinds of weird money issues, and that was part of their stresses. And the throwing in of the rapiers, I don't know why the firemen had rapiers. Maybe could either be a tarot thing, like Prince of Swords or something, or I was thinking about rapiers, or maybe I thought that back in the day, like classic firemen, you know, 100, 200 years ago had little swords on them. I looked it up and that doesn't seem to be the case. But anyway, what the rapiers seem to represent is the fact that this publicist I want to work with can either accept or reject my album. And so if she doesn't want to publicize it and take me on as her client, then I'm kind of on my own. I could choose another publicist, but I don't know that I will. I might just end up going a different route if this particular publicist I want rejects it. And so maybe that was a fear about, I tried to call in this help and this greater resource, but they didn't want to actually waste their resources on me, which is a real possibility with that publicist and in the publicist world. But then water starts coming in from above, from a secret place, and I think that is representing how I've been working with the archangels a lot and doing prayers towards them every day, and have been noticing a lot of interesting synchronicities and just boons and windfalls towards my career especially, but even as far as like finding an affordable apartment impossibly almost, and all these different things I think is related to these daily archangel prayers I've been doing. And so maybe that random water from above that just started putting out the fire when no one else was is kind of representing those angels. And it didn't put it out entirely because it probably, you know, they're not going to do everything for me. But the dream is just kind of left in this, the fire still burning and what exactly is going to work, and Misa's dilly-dallying, which is kind of what he was doing in the relationship, whether to end it or not, and what is kind of happening. It's not totally his fault, but what is kind of happening still to this day with my album. It's in his hands and it's in someone else's hands right now to get certain stuff done. And I think if I just maybe symbolically, if I finish the cover art to my album and have absolutely everything ready to receive the actual recordings, that's what I need to do from my end of it to make it all come together. So that's what I want to really be working on this coming month, is the album art for my album, so it's ready for everything else to be done.